What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and actually leads to results? My name is Miriam Happness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to help you to make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Dave Mastronardi, the CEO of Gamestorming, and we are talking about the facilitator becoming a magician and how we can use the principles of Gamestorming to design amazing workshops that lead to results. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take notes, why don't you visit workshops.work, search for episode 42, and just download mine. So enjoy the show and stay tuned.
Dave, welcome.
I'm Miriam.
I'm super excited to talk about games with you, about gamestorming, brainstorming, about improvisation, facilitation, and about the magic that happens when the facilitator tries to throw some games on their participants.
It's always in the name of fun.
Yes. We had a few conversations already, so I know that there are many things that you can share with the world, but maybe we can start with your story, how you ended up becoming the CEO of the Gamestorming group and what fascinates you about Gamestorming.
Sure. Thank you for having me. The book was published back in 2010, and that's when I first got exposed to Gamestorming is the name of the book and the technique, but it's really about visual thinking and collaboration. I was working at an agency doing strategy at the time and filling up PowerPoint slides with text. And through an acquisition, I became colleagues with the authors of the book, Gamestorming, and the rest of the agency that they founded and worked at. And so all of my new colleagues were visual thinkers. Post-it notes on the wall, flip charts, Sharpies, drawing. And I didn't know I needed it until I saw it. And then it became very attractive to me as a way of working individually with my team at the company I was working for, and then with clients. And we were getting better work done. I don't know if it was because of the fun we were having, but we were also having fun doing it. Mm-hmm. And so that just became a skill that I more than leaned into and tried to develop and took with me in various positions and jobs that I've had since then. I guess the most recent structured 9-to-5 job I had was abroad. When I came back stateside, I hooked up with Dave again and identified this opportunity to curate. I feel like I'm a curator of Gamestorming right now, but it's not my job to Gamestorm and to help people think visually, create clarity. I like to think of it as working better. It's not just things that you do in a workshop setting where you 3 weeks in advance, you've blocked the day off, 25 people's calendar, and you show up in the room and everybody expects something different, a departure from the normal workday. That's great, and those things work, but it's also what we do in those settings are things that you can take back to work with you and do when you're by yourself on a Tuesday morning from 9 to 10. So that's how I got here on the phone with you.
Yeah, I got this book in my hand and was fascinated just to have a concept of how to think of a workshop as a whole and every exercise within this workshop. So when speaking with you, I always had the impression that you approach the world and problems through the lens of Gamestorming. So every problem can be translated into a game.
Right.
And then the facilitator helps the participants to play this game to find clarity and solutions. So what is the magic behind Gamestorming? And what is it that you find in these games?
Again, going back to when I first got exposed to it and read the book, it wasn't even so much the games, because I don't think I had a working definition at the time of what a game is. And I think there's games, and then there's gamification.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like, which is to incentivize behavior, to make a casual game, right? Forget the Mafia Wars or Farmland that go back a couple of years in Facebook, where there were all of these different mechanics you could put into a game to incentivize a certain type of behavior, usually people paying money for things in your game. But there's a definition of a game. But even before we get to what a game is, it was this approach to really having a meeting. The idea for the book came from the idea to just have better meetings, which is nothing new. People are trying to improve meetings and make them more efficient and valuable all the time. So that's where the idea for the book came from. And the approach, it's not unique to meetings. There's kind of an opening or a warm-up. This is whether you're going for a run, you're going to play the piano, or you're going to have a meeting, right? You have to warm up. You don't get right into the heaviest part of the workout or the most intricate part of the piece without warming up. And that's the same thing when you're having a meeting or any kind of conversation. Then after you've warmed up and you've introduced your topics, your mind is in the right place. Then you go into this exploration, navigation. This is, I think, what a lot of people associate with brainstorming is if we didn't have any constraints, right? Big blank white wall. And that's great, right? That's kind of the next phase. You've warmed up. Now you're in the thick of it, exploring a problem or exploring possible countermeasures. And then you've got to come back and you've got to close. All right. So we brainstormed all these great ideas, or we figured out what the problem was, or some of the causes of the problem. What are we going to do now? How are we going to go back to work with this? Mm-hmm. Which, incidentally, I think, people have so much fun and they love getting into the exploration phase that oftentimes in workshops or in the meeting, in the conversation, we don't do enough of the closing. Okay, so now we have to prioritize these things, right? We have to assign value to them. We have to understand what it looks like practically when we take it back. Are we going to test it? Are we going to implement it? So you have this opening, you have this exploration, and then you have the close. Now, within that framework, you can conduct a podcast interview. You can have your 90-minute monthly team meeting. You can have a 5-day workshop. Right? Like if you think in that framework, it kind of repeats, right? It's this pattern that once you're aware of it, you start to see it. I presume our talk here is going to go through the same. We're opening right now, right? Mm-hmm. So then games, right? So in the pattern, what are the discrete things that you do that would be considered, we call them games, but you do them all the time. Activities in some industries, like education, they call them protocols. Mm-hmm. But so let's think through what a game is. It really consists of 3 parts. You've got your game board. What's in bounds, what's out of bounds. You could be on the soccer pitch, or you could be doing a SWOT analysis or an empathy map, right? Those are all game boards. Mm-hmm. You've got the pieces that you need to play with: the ball, the sticky note, the Sharpie, the flip chart, the canvas. And then you've got the goal and the rules, essentially, or the steps, the instructions. And so with those 3 ingredients, you can make a game. Mm-hmm. And so, you can make a game out of anything if you define those 3 things. And so games, workshop design or Gamestorming, you have inputs and outputs. So what are the things that you need to start the game? A problem statement or a situation to analyze. And then the outputs, right? Well, now we've got a new campaign, or we've got a new product that we want to push or feature. And how do those, so when you're developing in the framework of open, explore, close, and you're putting games together, you have to think about inputs and outputs, because the outputs from some activities will be the inputs to others. Mm-hmm. Don't always have to be the next activity. Could be something you do in the morning, is the input for a game you do later on in the afternoon, and there's some things in between. And then that's when you get those, okay, now I understand why we did that thing earlier in the morning. So that's the framework that we think of, and how we think of games and piecing them together.
And I think this is the important part, because you mentioned that it's not a gamification. So for me, the difference between a game, as you would describe it, and a gamification of a problem is that yours is a concept, a way of reasoning and approaching a conversation and a problem, whereas a gamification is how to turn a process into a fun activity where we trick our brains to create some dopamine highs.
Yeah, I think there's an element of competition in gamification, in hierarchy. And I think what we try to do, and one of the things we hear all the time, is because of the approach that we take, it takes the competition out. You think of some of the things that go wrong in the meeting. One of the things we always hear is, well, the boss is in the room and he's at the top of the org chart. He dominates the conversation. Or the highest paid person's in the room. She dominates the conversation. What we try to do with Gamestorming is take that out and flatten. When you come into the room, and it's one of the reasons to have a third-party facilitator, is to flatten the room. And so everybody has parity of participation in the workshop. And I think gamification could lead to, oh, I'm winning. And that's not the point here.
True. It is totally the point of the gamification, because it's the winning, it's the competition that drives you. And I'm surprised, happily surprised, about this insight that Gamestorming is not about competition. And it's so counterintuitive, because very often when we hear games, we think of competition, unless we think of, there's this book called Finite and Infinite Games. I love it. I don't recall the name of the author, but he says that the difference is that a finite game is defined by clear rules and a goal that everyone tries to achieve. So there's competition. Whereas an infinite game, the only goal is to keep on playing. And then it becomes an entire mindset. So what you describe as the basic philosophy of Gamestorming rather reminds me of an infinite game where the fun comes from playing.
Yeah, and it's the, hey, we can turn anything into this type of a game. Of course, we have to stop playing in that 90 minutes or a day. We've got to move on, and we are trying to reach a goal. But I think the goal is that you're on a team, or you're working across teams in this workshop, and I think everybody's got the same goal, which is not for them to win, but it's to figure out the situation, to get unstuck. A lot of times, broadly, people want to get unstuck or clarity. And so everybody's open to other people's ideas, especially when you can flatten the room again. Right? And I think that's...
And I love this concept of flattening the room. What does it take to do that? What is it a game can do that a normal meeting cannot?
At the start of a workshop, and when I'm introducing Gamestorming, ask the room to imagine if we had enough Monopoly sets in the room for everybody to participate in a game. And if there were, how long would it take for everybody in the room to be playing a Monopoly game, right? It wouldn't take very long, right? Open the box. You might have to remember, all right, what are the different denominations that everybody starts with of money? But the boss doesn't get to start with any more money than the frontline worker, right? The individual contributor. The introvert at the table doesn't start in jail, right?
Sorry. Love the picture.
Because there are rules. And for Monopoly, most people know the rules of Monopoly. And so everybody plays by the rules. And so everybody has an equal chance at the beginning of the game to participate. So that's essentially what we do here. Now, there's some things that you do in a game because participation is involved, communication and sharing, but it's essentially the same thing. So you have the rules of the game, but then you also have some rules of facilitation that you want to follow as well to create this. And so you want to accommodate as many personality types as you can. And I think the biggest one that we see all the time is the introvert versus the extrovert, And so instead of asking for, popcorn responses or just like an open free-for-all type of response, usually what we'll do is in a game, and this is how we write them, and this is how we also facilitate them. We'll pose a question, or it'll be the first step, and it will always involve somebody or everybody with a pen and a pad, a sticky note and a pad of Post-it notes. Take 5 minutes to individually brainstorm. Some people are really good without that. Other people need to make sure they choose just the right words. And so you need to accommodate for that, right? So that's the first thing. Then when you share, okay, let's go around the table. So imagine a room, 5 tables, 5 people at each table. So you've got 25 people in the room. So you've got this individual time. Brainstorm your response to whatever the prompt is. All right, then share at your group, right? So then it's the person next to you. So you're not sharing at the room level yet. It's just the group. And you give everybody a certain amount of time and you go around the table. And then depending on what's going on, where we are in the process, then maybe you share with the room, right? So it's individual table or group room. And there's time. You can't, again, you can't take any more time than anybody else. You can't give anybody else less time than anybody else. So you're accommodating different personality types and you're giving everybody equal time to participate. And so you have to create the conditions for the parity in facilitation, but in room setup too. I think that's very important, is the organization or the design of the room, which is something that we take a lot of care to make sure that the room is set up for Gamestorming as well.
So what's the best room setup for Gamestorming?
I can send you a picture because of course we drew it. Round tables preferably, 5 to 7 people at the table, plenty of space in between tables, and everybody having access to wall space as well. Right? You don't want the table getting too crowded. So you can hang things up on the wall so other people can see them. You don't want the room too big. You don't want 5 tables in a convention center ballroom, right? Because then you're too far away from the walls. So you want to have an intimate feeling, but you don't want it so close that people are bumping shoulders. You might need some room for easels. We try to steer away from PowerPoints, presentations, except when maybe it's important to introduce a concept, or maybe you need to frame the workshop with some work that the client has been doing. So it's important, depending on who you've got in the room, for some context setting. But usually we try to, either the facilitator or we try to have everybody else draw what it is, the ideas that they want to create. So it's a lot about space.
Yeah.
Like balancing space and intimacy.
Can totally see that. And it's funny that we feel so attracted to round tables. There's a magic about round tables that somehow, and I don't know whether it's just in our minds and imagination that we communicate better on round tables, or whether it's a proven fact.
Yeah. I'm
not sure.
We certainly don't want traditional school style seating.
Yeah.
Right. And if you go to the client site and they just don't happen to have round tables, a rectangular or a square tables, you get people facing each other. I think that's what you want, right?
Yeah.
Going back to the personality types, it's also good. Like, here's your space, here's your group space, so you can see the other people. And then you still have a room, but when you're working, it's these five people.
And maybe it's easier to allocate a varying number of people around a round table than a rectangular table. Because if you have 3 people, then there are 2 people on one side, or they're too far away from each other. So it's always kind of complicated, and it makes it much easier around a round table.
Yeah.
That's the only explanation that kind of makes sense in my head right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you want to look around. I mean, part of the reason somebody joked that we can double as a wallpaper company is because we put a lot of stuff on the walls deliberately, right? That's what we want the wall space is because, you might do something early in the morning. Let's put it up on the wall. And it's, I don't know if you realize it, but you're looking at it, you're looking around the room the rest of the time, and you want to be able to go back to it. What was that thing that we heard our customers say about us that we should take and like when we're developing our talking points for our sales pitch? That's another reason that if it's too big, some of the artifacts get too far away. You can't see them. So you want the right space for the size. But yeah, I guess the round table, it's easier to kind of look around the room and see what's on the walls and incorporate it into the next things that you do.
Yeah. And it seems as if it would also flatten the room, because then there's not a natural side for a stage or for someone to talk to the entire group. And putting the outcomes of the conversation on the wall is also a part, it seems to me at least, of the democratization of the process, because then you have transparency. You can see what the other tables were discussing about and producing, and it's visible to all of them. It's nothing that happens behind closed doors or at closed tables. You produce it at the table, but then you put it out there for everyone to see it.
That's right. I like that.
When we had our pre-conversations, we talked a lot about the fact that as a facilitator, we don't want to get bored with the workshops that we are doing, because we might have a set of exercises or games that we do, but if we do them over and over again, then it becomes a routine. And then if we are bored, how can we expect our participants to be excited about? So I would be curious to hear from you. What are you doing to keep yourself curious and excited and fun while curating your workshops? We
have a tenet that we try to incorporate into everything that we do, which is do something new every workshop. Mm-hmm. So whether that's do a new game or do the same game a different way, we're constantly trying to mix it up. And it's something that we share with the room, right? So you don't get into that rut. And then there's experimentation and improvisation. I think as I was starting out with Gamestorming and just facilitation, I would write out every word that I was going to say in a spreadsheet. It had, all right, so here's the game. Here's when we're going to start it. Here's how long it's going to take. These are the materials that we need. Here's the introduction to the game. And then, ask everybody if they've understood. Then the next step. And so I would literally have this written out word for word. And for a while, I needed that I wanted to make sure I was doing what the book said I should be doing, right? Because if I did that, you couldn't blame me for if things were to go wrong, right? But so that was the approach. And then, don't deviate from that. Out of security in learning. Once you do that enough, you will get bored, right? It's like, it's the same games. I know I've got the script down, but you also need to do it. Like, that's a really good way to do it. To that's internalize. How you learn. That's how you learn. But then to your point, you get bored. It's the same, whatever games. Here we go. It's the empathy map again. And so look, some games you have to do, and that's one of them I feel is just, it's such a powerful activity or turning point for people, aha moments in a workshop. You've got to do it. You've just got to do the game. Are you thinking of a specific game when you say that? The empathy map. Okay. Do you want to guide us through? Well, hold on, I will in a sec. I just want to. So you do that. I think once you start to internalize those things, and you do start. Okay, I'm just going to do one thing different. Maybe I just do one thing different in the next workshop. So you've got your, maybe you've got like a day workshop that you like, and you've got your however many activities that you like to do, like your general agenda. All right, I'm going to switch something out. Achieves the same purpose, but maybe we do it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I include a wrinkle in this game so the participants think about it differently. And then you take that little baby step towards improvisation, right? Which is ultimately, I don't know, I feel like there are magician facilitators. Mm-hmm. And I think what I've come to learn is that the magicians that I would see facilitate, like, how do they do that? The process, the talk track, the thinking has just become so ingrained, and they've just rehearsed it so much, it comes off as magic. And they have options at every stage, depending on what comes up. And that's why hey, just incorporate one thing in your next workshop. If you've got maybe 10 moving parts to your workshop, just keep 9 of them the same, try changing one. Mm-hmm. You change one enough, and all of a sudden you've got options, you know, and you can start to become this magician that no matter what happens in the work, you can improvise. And it's this combination of, I think improvisation requires confidence, but it's this combination of improvisation and confidence that ends up making you a better facilitator. Because what you realize is that so many of these activities that we do, they're the same activity, right? And I didn't realize it. I didn't get the insight until I had just done it so many times. And I took a step back. I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, I do these 15 to 20 things, but really they're essentially 3 unique activities, right? And everything else is just a variation on them, whether it's the game, so something like the cover story and build the box. Like, yeah, there's some differences there, but they're essentially, you can use them in a visioning exercise, right?
It's like a dance where you have the standard steps and then you build everything around it.
Yeah. Anything else that you improvise, right? I'm sure a comedian does the same thing. A comedian works out the material enough that they know what jokes will work when, and maybe depending on the audience, depending on the city they're in, they can pick and choose from their arsenal of jokes. Yeah. So that's how I think you keep it fresh. At first, it's really hard to keep it fresh, but that's not, you're not bored yet.
Yeah.
Right? When you're facilitating and you want to get the talk track right, and you just want to internalize these activities, because it is important to go step by step to make sure everybody's following along, especially in these bigger groups. So you do want to go through that phase where you're memorizing what are the critical parts here. And then, you get bored. It's like, okay.
Yeah. I just stumbled over one word that you just said, and it's when you described how you would, in the beginning, when you just started, script everything. And then it's the fear of being blamed because it's not working out.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much truth in that. And it's such a catch-22, because the moment that you fear to be blamed for making a mistake, you externalize this to the group. So if you have blame in your mind, then the tendency to blame them because they are not behaving according to the script is just so much bigger. And then you try to control the room, and then you don't give the participants the space to really come up with creative solutions. So the boundaries that, and I'm just thinking out loud now, let me know if you think that it's off track, but I have the impression that the boundaries that we are putting ourselves on and the mindset that we are keeping, we transmit it to the participants whether we want it or not.
Yeah, I never really thought that I was actually projecting that to
projections
the room. I certainly may have, right? And putting that onto the room. Agenda and timing were really important at the beginning, right? How can we do this fun stuff, but also, if you let people out a few minutes before lunch, they almost expect it. But if you keep them a minute past lunch, you're the worst facilitator they've ever had. Right? So that was always a concern. And it still comes up. It still comes up in a lot of ways, because I know when you go to a client, it's hard for them. They've got to use some, social capital equity at work to bring people together in a workshop. And so you want to be very respectful of the time and make sure you get to everything. And that's, I'll go back to, we talked about open, explore, and close. A lot of times you're having a lot of fun and creativity in that explore phase, but it's really important. And I think the value is going to come in that closing phase, in the decision, like, what are we going to take it back to work? Because everybody's having fun now, but a couple of days later, when you get back on the phone with the person who signed the contract for you to come in, like, they're going to forget about all of the fun that you had. And they're going to want to know, all right, so is our product roadmap any better? Did we create that game that we wanted to create? What are we doing as next steps in our strategy creation, right? There's got to be some really tactical things. So you do have to take care to manage the time. And that's another thing. It's not just the talk tracks, but it's also, all right, I estimate, a build the box, design the box is going to be 20 minutes, but it always turns out to be 50 minutes. So you've got to learn those things. Yeah. And then you've got to learn all right, just as a skill, where do I get that time back from in other places? Yeah. And so that all goes into the improvisation too. You have to have like the knowledge of how long things take, of what exercises work, which ones are you comfortable with, and then how can you mix and match them? Because sometimes you don't want to interrupt. Like, there's a really good conversation and you feel like there's an aha moment in the room. Yeah. And so you want to let it go. And that's when early on, I'd be back at my computer. I'd be looking at the spreadsheet. All right, like, where this is good, but okay, what are we not going to do later on? Can we make it a working lunch, and get the time back there? And so I think it shifts from like a nervousness to which I think it's maybe viral in the room. Yeah. And you don't want to project that and take away from the imagination and the creativity and bring that anxiety back into the room. And so I think as you get better at facilitation, like, you know what, this happens. It's just kind of like, all right, no big deal. I know what to do here. I know how to make this work.
I'm Rain. I'm from Experiential Learning. We facilitate programs for executives, and we use Session Lab because it's a very easy tool to design a meeting, easy to share with your colleagues, and get a script for the meeting in no time without too much hassle.
So visit sessionlab.com and find out more yourself. So what is for you the biggest mistake a facilitator can make?
I don't know what the biggest one is. I think a couple of things come to mind. If, let's just say, the workshop goes poorly, what things might contribute to that? The biggest thing, it's not even facilitation. I think the biggest mistake you can do is under-prepare. Because I think so much of a workshop success is in the preparation that you do, making sure that you've identified the right problems that you want to address, the right questions you want to be able to answer on the other end of the workshop, right? Understanding enough. You can have enough information to be not invaluable, but a little constraining. It is good to come in with fresh eyes and as a third party. It's also really important to understand the client, their business, the business model. So you want to do research there. I think you can over-engineer an agenda. Right. And you can try to do too much. Something that I was told as I was working with some facilitation masters, as a rule of thumb, when you come up with your agenda, cut it in half. Right?
Love it. Yeah.
You can probably do about half of the things, or things will take twice as long as you think they will. Yeah. And then along those lines, you have to leave room for the close, for the decisions. And I find that's a discipline, to be able to eloquently cut off conversations because you need to get to important things.
How much time would you allocate or would you plan for the closing?
It depends what it is. But you can still be creative in the closing, right? A lot of times the closing, the decisions and the commitments, how are we going to prioritize that? It still facilitates a very creative, analytical discussion. So it's not like you're cutting off any of the creativity, but you're really exploring the options. And so again, depending on what it is, so you might brainstorm some options you want to take, whether it's product features, or product roadmap, maybe it's a new service offering, or maybe it's a strategy. And sometimes it's easy when it's something like product features on a roadmap. You can prioritize them, you can evaluate them. I feel they're fairly straightforward. Full day. If you want to get into the risk, so hey, in the explore phase, we came up with these 10 things. How do we rank them by impact and effort? Or the $100 test. How would I allocate $100 to these, right? Then, so that might be good enough. right? Depending on what the stakeholder, like, I want to come up and prioritize our product roadmap. Okay. Another step you could take there, though, is you identify how you want to prioritize those. So you have your list. Maybe you can start to do a pre-mortem on those things. All right. So what's going to get in the way of us? And maybe this shifts, maybe it's not the software piece, but maybe this is more of an internal change management piece or a strategy. What's going to get in the way of us implementing this? So you maybe you can identify blockers, right?
Would this be the closing? Because for me, this sounds very much like the storming phase still.
So you could do a pre-mortem again, it depends on where you are, right?
Yeah.
If the idea was to like brainstorm things for implementation, the storming would be around the new concepts. That's why I say the closing, it's not a complete cutoff, but it is, all right, how are we going to bring this back to work?
Yeah.
Right. The exploring and the storming is blue sky. Anything goes. No holds barred. No constraints. No idea is a bad idea.
Okay, and the pre-mortem really brings it down and makes it tangible.
Yeah. Look, you could do the pre-mortem at the very beginning of an activity, and this is where it becomes fun. We identify, all right, these in the book. This is a game for opening. This is a game for exploring. This is a game for closing. I have found that different facilitators use different games. And you can, right? And this is where I mentioned like all games are really 3 games, right? Once you start to realize that you can mix and match things all around. So it's not even so much the game, the title that indicates where it needs to go in the process, but the closing phase is really about the practicality of the approach, the taking it back to work. So yes, we could do an obstacles way up front. Absolutely. The example that I happened to pull, I'm envisioning myself in that particular workshop. We did it at the end, right? Because we came up with new concepts. And as a way to bring it back to work and put the plan together for how we would implement this thing that we didn't have at the beginning of the workshop, we wanted to see, all right, so what's our milestone level plan? What are the things that get in the way of that milestone? Who are the blockers? Who might be the blockers? And then how do we mitigate that? And then you walk out of the workshop with your project plan, your milestone level plan with risks and risk mitigation. Could you do that at the beginning? Absolutely. If you know the thing, if you already, we know what it is that we want to do. Okay,
and then you can zoom in on one blocker, on one thing. What is the one thing that we want to explore further?
That's right. Because maybe it's a big enough problem.
Yeah.
Or a big enough opportunity.
Yeah. And it depends on the work that has been done before.
Absolutely. That's right.
You mentioned before, and I won't let you get away with it, the empathy map.
Yeah, right.
Because you said it's your favorite, and I love to hear the favorite game of my guests as a walkthrough.
You sent me that in the the email pre-interview. It's not my favorite game, but it's I was giving a talk to a group, I would say younger professionals. And they were asking after there was Q&A, and they were asking about Gamestorming. And they asked, like, what's the most popular game? And I said, well, the empathy map is kind of like our Freebird. And I don't know if that reference lands with you. It certainly didn't land with the crowd that I was talking to. And look, it's definitely the most popular game. I see it all. I was standing in line at the airport yesterday, and I was looking through the feed of articles that my phone determines I should look at. And it's figured out enough of the searching that I do that it knows I'm interested in empathy mapping. And so I would say 2 or 3 times a week, I see a Medium post that references Gamestorming's empathy map. It's used widely.
So if someone in the audience doesn't know what an empathy map is.
Right. Also known as the big head. So it is a way to get inside a stakeholder's head by first understanding what's going on in their sensory world, right? So you identify a stakeholder. The more specific you can be, if you're in a room that everybody knows this person, right, the better. But at least give them a title, okay? Then you give them a responsibility. What's the goal that this person has. So you've got some context. Then you draw your big circle in the middle of so you can do this in your notebook. You can do this on 11 by 17 is a great size, but so A3, you can A0s. We do this a lot with big prints of empathy maps. And so if you think of kind of like the profile of a smiley face, an eye, a mouth, and an ear as almost boundary markers. So then, in this person, given their goal, what are the things that they see in their everyday life? Colleagues, media, what reports are they looking at? What publications are they reading? What trends do they notice? Move around. What are they saying? Quotes are good here, right? The more specific you can get around quotes. Like the seeing thing, you have to, there's a little guesswork there. But if you've interacted with this person or this type of person, you can imagine what they're saying, right? So that's kind of where the mouth is on the big head. Then directly down at 6 o'clock, what are they doing? Right? What actions do you see them take? Action indicates priority, right? So where they're spending their time, who are they meeting with? Then you move to the 9 o'clock, the ear. What are they hearing? Right? Everybody's got a boss, or people. What are they hearing from their boss? Their stakeholders. What are they hearing from the market? What are they hearing from other teams in the organization? So now you go around the face, the big head, outside, but you're outside. So now you have an understanding of what's going on, the outside. And you want to do the outside first. It's very important. Then you go inside the head. Okay. So, and there's a couple ways you can get inside the head. So now that you know what's going on outside, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? Okay. You can almost make like an accounting T, a T count, right? What are they thinking and feeling?
Like the left and the right brain, even inside the head.
Right. What are their hopes and what are their dreams?
Yeah.
Based on this, right? And you're keeping that goal in mind that you've identified at the outset.
What the roadblock, resistance.
Yes. What stands in the way of them achieving their hopes and dreams? What makes that achievement faster? What slows it down? What speeds it up? This is very effective.
Awesome.
Much in many of the workshops we do, this always comes back as like when we did the empathy map, game changer, right? It gave me completely different perspective for my job and the thing that I work on.
And I have one question because I haven't found a solution myself. So I'm really curious what you say. To what extent makes it sense, or is it better to ask participants to really think of one specific person, one specific stakeholder, or to make one extreme user up? Because I could
the more specific you can be, I found the better the results. Right? Like the more you can identify, maybe I haven't done it enough. I don't know that I've come up with an instance that at least somebody in the person doesn't know like who it is we're talking about here. Like we've never had to, all right, let's make somebody up, right? And that part of that is because of the lead-in exercise we do to the empathy map, right? We talk about what games come before, what games come after, outputs and inputs. So usually we do a very specific game before to identify who it is that we're talking about here. So very rarely do we have to make up somebody.
Yeah. Because I do understand the logic behind it, that it makes so much more tangible to speak about someone that everyone knows. On the other hand, I realized that very often you go into the extremes and then there often parts of this person coming out that are maybe not so pleasant or that are difficult. And then you get into the space where maybe you're not politically correct, maybe you want to hold back, maybe you don't dare to speak out everything. But so if you just say, okay, we're not naming this person, we're just thinking of an extreme. And most of the people in the room have the same person in mind, but nobody speaks it out. And then you can just push them, okay, you can be extreme, you have permission to put whatever into their mouth, what they could say, to push it even further in the extreme. Then they can act in a more safe space.
Sure, right. Yeah, this has come up a couple of times, especially when we've had the boss in the room and they were the, right?
Yeah, and then they talk about the boss in the room, and everyone knows, but he or she.
Yeah. But there have been situations where I've been in that a group has asked me not to take pictures of the empathy map for a capture standpoint, and if we could throw it out afterwards, which is totally fine with. Yeah. If it helps solve the problem, then we want to do the right empathy map. But I get it. I think you have to find the balance. If people aren't going to be comfortable with naming the person, then that tells you something about the dynamic in the room.
Yeah.
And I would say like use the extreme user so you're not naming anybody.
Yeah.
If you can, I prefer it. But I'm sure there's benefits of naming. Even if you named the person, what I liked about the extreme anonymous person is the extreme part. Right? It may be asking like, what's the most extreme thing you've seen them? That might even be something you would want to incorporate into the exercise and the framing of the different pieces of the process. Because
for me, this is the point where it really gets interesting, because especially when we think of customer centricity. So when we think of adjusting our process or our product to a specific customer, internal or external, if we're thinking about average, then our solution will be average. But when we think of extremes, then this is the moment where it gets into emotion, where it becomes human, because we think of, okay, how can this, if we have this one person who always complains and always sees problems and everything, how can we make sure that this person becomes happy? Right. Yeah, nobody's average, right? We have averages, but nobody's actually... And nobody wants to be average, and nobody buys average. That's right. Yeah. So whether it's specific or extreme, I think those are better options too. Even like the concept of a persona, which I would say like a persona is kind of average, but like pull out aspects of the persona. Yeah. Which, that's what an individual does. That's when you name somebody, they probably fit into a persona, but they demonstrate, I guess, extremes or variations of the different traits that make up a persona. Yeah. So the empathy map. Yeah, I love the picture that you drew around it. Yeah, so again, the big head. And there's a good canvas that you can get. It was actually the Medium post I was reading online, waiting to go through security at the airport. He didn't reference the source material. I was about to comment, but then I had to go through the metal detector. That's what's that? What would you have commented? Well, where did you get this? Ah, okay. Or where can I find this? So maybe we can put the link to the Medium article in the show notes, and then we can find out. Yeah, we'll put the link to the source material. Yes, hopefully. Yeah, so that's just something, if you incorporate it into your workshop, one, it's really helpful. Two, you're going to get good marks for doing it. Yeah. Right? Awesome. We are kind of running out of time. Yeah, I've got to get out of here because of that. Yeah. So I always ask the question, if someone fell asleep after minute 1, just woke up, and like, oh my goodness, I missed the entire show and I have no time to listen to it all over again. What do you want this person to take away? Well, I don't even know if we talked about this. One of the questions that either came up in our email conversations or other conversations where it was a thing that what makes workshop fail? We talked about it a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. I think you said, what's the worst thing a facilitator? Mm-hmm. What makes workshops fail? I think workshops are really effective. I've seen them work on both the participant side and on the facilitator side. Where I think people are unhappy with a workshop, or if somebody is considering doing a workshop, not so much, well, it's not so much a specific workshop fail as this idea of what you do in a workshop is unique. Mm. And you do block time on your calendar, and you block everybody's day off, and we all get into a room and there's going to be snacks and somebody's going to come in and we're just going to do what this other person says. And I think that's the thing that actually makes workshops work, is that there is this focus. And it's special, it's unique, it's set apart. But I also think that's the biggest weakness of a workshop, is you associate what you do in a workshop with only doing those things in a workshop. Mm. And I think
we talk about taking the work back in the closing phase, but it's not just that, it's taking everything back. You can take everything that you do in a workshop back to work with you. And that's what I would want people to take away, is just the idea of working better and not compartmentalizing the activities that you go through in a workshop to the workshop. You can do a post-up in your cube or in your home office. You can do an empathy map on a smaller piece of paper. They make smaller sticky notes too. It doesn't have to be the big A0. So to me, workshops are just, they demonstrate to you, like if you're looking for it as a participant, they are ways to just work better. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you just woke up, next time you go to a workshop, don't just go through the exercises and do what the facilitator says, but look at what's happening, how the day is structured, why the facilitator has chosen the agenda they've chosen, the activities that they've chosen, and think about how you can put those in your toolbox. It's just a way to work better. Whether it doesn't necessarily have to be in front of a room of 35 people. How can you take those things back to work with you tomorrow?
Awesome. Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome, Miriam. Thank you.
If someone wants to reach out to you, stay in the conversation, hire you, work with you, how can they find you?
You can go to Gamestorming. Go to Gamestorming anyway. There's a contact field. We can put an email address. We can put these links in the show notes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So check the show notes or gamestorming.com. And all of the games in the book are there, plus some additional ones. And there's a contact us form.
Yeah. And that's how I contacted you.
That's how you contacted me.
Yes.
So it works.
So it does work. He does answer.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Enjoy New York.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
We'll talk soon.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.